So I'm a postdoc at the Newcomb Institute, joint in CS and Environmental Studies, and it's my real pleasure this afternoon to introduce Christina and Julia Tartaglia, the co-founders of the Scientista Foundation. So these sisters are both Harvard alumna, and they've put in a lot of hours in the lab. So Christina majored in molecular and cellular biology and spent a lot of time working with mice to study drug development and autoimmune response. Julia chose a slightly larger study organism, humans, studying human evolutionary biology with a focus on mind, brain, and behavior. I just want to note two of the things I find especially insightful about their work in founding the Scientista Foundation, which include the idea of connecting young women with high-profile, thriving role models through web media with programs like their video-based office hours, and also creating real practical guidelines and timelines for things like med school applications and grad school applications, some information that makes it way easier to think about doing those kinds of things. So I hope that all of you are as excited as I am to welcome Julia and Christina.
Hi, everyone. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for having us today. It's really an honor to be here to speak to all of you on behalf of Scientista. So I'm Julia, and this is my sister, Christina. And as mentioned, we're the co-founders of the Scientista Foundation, which is a network and online platform that empowers pre-professional women in science and engineering. And just in case you don't know, I'm going to be using the word STEM a lot. And STEM just stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, just to put that out there. So before we go into the story about how and why we started the Scientista Foundation, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this current STEM culture. So we chose to title our talk, Changing the Ratio, A New Science and Engineering Culture. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why we chose this topic. So I just wanted to start by showing you a comic that I think really embodies what's happening right now with our culture in the sciences. So I'll just give you a second to read it. So I hear some chuckles. I think you got to the punchline. But what this joke is saying is, in the first frame, we have a boy who's given a stereotypical boy toy, which is something computer and remote control based. And then we have a girl who is given a doll, and it doesn't have, too many functions or variety. And subsequently, in the third frame, we have two male engineers wondering, why aren't there more women engineers? And what this comic is showing is that there are a lot of cultural elements that are actually shaping people's interests from a young age. And a lot of these cultural elements might be able to explain why we see fewer women going into STEM careers than men. So first, I want to start by just framing the problem. So the big question, the million-dollar question that everyone is trying to answer is, why aren't there more women in STEM? So just to give you some statistics, right now the ratio of women to men, or men to women in STEM professions is only about 3 to 1. So 1 out of every 4 STEM professionals is a woman. And these numbers are staggeringly low considering how much progress women have made in the workforce. And a lot of the times you'll hear people talk about a phenomenon they call the leaky STEM pipeline, which just means that women are dropping out of the STEM pathway from every turning point, every major turning point in their educational path. So from high school to college, in high school, actually, there are more young women taking AP classes in science and math than boys. But in college, we already see that the number of men who are thinking about majoring in science is double the number of women. And then again, by the time women are graduating from college, only about 50 to 60% are still science majors. So if you were to think about it, if all of you were still freshmen, I know we have a mix, that would mean that by the time you graduate, only half of you would still be in this room. So just to show you some figures, Right now, US women are actually scoring higher in math and science than their male counterparts. So as you can see, the green line is girls and the bottom line is boys. And women are actually earning more bachelor's degrees than men. So this number was closer to 50-50, and now we're actually seeing a bigger gap. So it's not that there are fewer women studying just in the sciences. So despite the fact that there are more women in college than men, there are still fewer women holding BAs in STEM fields. So the numbers are going up, and not everything is bleak about this, but they're still not as high as many people would like them to be. And I do just want to point out that you do see differences in the numbers depending on what STEM field you're looking at. So for example, the life sciences tend to have more women, and the ratio is about 50-50 at the college level, as opposed to computer science and engineering, where the numbers are closer to 20 and 30%. But as you go up the ladder, even in the life sciences, the number of women who continue to pursue science degrees and make it to the top positions is still below the number of men. And we call this a glass ceiling effect, because there seems to be a ceiling that women hit before they are no longer in the 50% range. Okay, so why do we care? That seems silly, but it could be a valid question, and it's something that someone might ask you one day. You know, why can't we just have all the science fields be dominated by men? Why is that a problem? So there are three main reasons why this is actually a problem. One reason is because diversity has been shown to lead to innovation. There was a study done at Cornell which showed that groups that had greater gender diversity and informational diversity actually had better results when completing a task. And really interestingly, the study showed that gender and age diversity actually led to increased morale and higher satisfaction in the group. And that's pretty significant, because higher morale can actually also lead to greater results when you're completing a task. And the study also showed that it was actually differences in the group, in values between group members, that led to dissatisfaction and conflict. So for example, if one person thought the goal or the mission of a group was efficiency, but another person thought that it was something else, then that would lead to conflict. But gender was not really a problem. Diversity also leads to a diversity of ideas. One good example of this is actually a personal example. I went to a talk this past year with a woman who actually led a group of an all-female hackathon. And she said that she was so surprised, she didn't know how the group was going to go, but the very first time they met, the women came together and they decided to make an app that was looking at sex trafficking. So that's just one example of an issue that might be more prevalent to women and that women might be interested in researching. Here's another example of a woman who was actually an early mobile game developer, and she left to actually produce games that helped teach kids to code. Women, this isn't a new concept that women were doing research. The first dishwasher was actually invented by a woman. And some of you may know Hedy Lamarr. She was an actress and a model, but she actually invented an early version of frequency hopping. So number two of why we care. We need more people in STEM careers, more men and more women. STEM fields are really where jobs are being created right now. And from 2000 to 2013, STEM careers actually grew by more than 30%. It's a lot. And from that same time period, the actual number of STEM jobs increased by 4 million. So there are a lot of STEM jobs, and this doesn't seem to be something that's going away. And, this probably isn't shocking, but the US News estimates that in the near future, 50% of available jobs will actually require STEM skills. And they go on to talk about that these jobs aren't just traditional STEM jobs like scientists, PhDs, or engineers. A lot of different jobs are going to start requiring people to have more quantitative skills. This is an example of a mechanic who works on an aircraft, and not something you might think of as being a STEM job, but actually can require some pretty lofty STEM background. So you would think, wow, like this is the future, a lot of STEM jobs, people must be flocking to study STEM. And unfortunately, that is not the case. A recent study has shown that there is actually a declining interest in high school students to study STEM fields, which is very shocking. And the US is trailing behind other countries in standardized test scores. This isn't new information, but it may become more of a problem as the future becomes more and more STEM. And the chairman of the company that actually did this study said that if these educational trends continue, fewer qualified candidates will be available to support growth in these areas. It is critical to our business and the United States' long-term economic outlook that we inspire young people to engage in STEM and dedicate resources to supporting them throughout their academic lives. So this is a big issue for America and for the world at large. And just as a reminder, we saw this slide before, but US women actually do have higher math and science GPAs. So by not tapping into that whole pool, we're really missing out on a lot of talent. So the third reason is that STEM professionals actually do earn a lot more money than a lot of other fields, and women are missing out. And as more and more jobs become STEM, women are just going to continue to be missing out. So women hold 50% of jobs, so they are in the workforce, but they only hold 25% of STEM jobs. So, that's a problem. They're missing out on career growth, and a lot of the top-paying jobs. And also, studies have shown that there is a smaller wage gap for jobs in STEM between the sexes. And, knowing that there's a big problem between income diversity, this disparity, this could be a huge sort of boost for women. Okay, so we laid out that there aren't as many women in STEM, and now we know why it's important to have more women in STEM. So what is the problem? Why aren't we seeing more women going into STEM careers? Well, the first problem lies in stereotyping. And I have another comic strip for you that I think does a good job of showing an example of a stereotype, where when perhaps a man is doing math, we might say, oh, and he messes up, you say, oh, you're bad at math. If a girl happens to be bad at math, people generalize and think, oh, all women must be bad at math. So this is just a simplification of kind of what's happening with women in science. So first I'm going to be talking about an important term known as implicit bias. And this means the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So implicit biases are stereotypes that happen when people aren't even aware of it. So maybe if you were to ask someone, do you think girls are bad at math? They believe that they don't think girls are bad at math. So someone might say, no, of course not. I think girls and boys are equally capable of doing well at math. But their behaviors actually illustrate that they do have an association that boys are better at math and girls are worse at math. So I'm just going to take you through a few really pivotal studies that are illustrating that there are still implicit biases against women in STEM. So the first one is very relevant in an academic setting, and this is actually a study that was conducted at Yale by Professor Joe Handelsman in 2012. And when this study came out, it got a lot of media attention. Basically, they were examining to see if science faculty exhibit a bias against their female students. And they believed that this type of disparity could be creating problems because if science faculty are being biased in favor of male students, they aren't providing women with the mentorship that they need to really succeed in these fields. So what they did is they designed a randomized double-blind study with science faculty from research-intensive universities across the country. And what they had them do was they had them rate application materials of students that was randomly assigned male or female in gender. So just to simplify that, they would take a resume, and it was the exact same resume, and on one they would put a girl's name, on one they would put a boy's name. And they would give them to the professors, and they would ask them to rate the students and say, which one would you give a job offer to, which student is more qualified. So the results of this study were really shocking. They actually found that science professors widely regarded female undergraduates as less competent than the male students with the exact same accomplishments. And the professors were less likely to offer these women a mentorship or a job opportunity than their male counterparts. And this wasn't just male faculty members. They found that female faculty also were favoring male applicants over female applicants. And even if they did give them a job offer, they offered the women a lower salary, a lower starting salary than they did with the male counterparts. So this is really showing that you students are actually being maybe subconsciously at a disadvantage when it comes to getting jobs with professors and research departments, even in your own university. And interestingly, these results held across STEM disciplines. So they found that it didn't matter if they were looking at faculty and students in biology versus physics versus engineering, which is pretty surprising because remember, in biology, the numbers are about 50-50, and you see those numbers going pretty high up, but the results were the same. The female students were still being selected against by their faculty members. So what is this saying? It isn't implying that professors are consciously being biased against their female students, that they acknowledge or that they even realize that they have these biases. But it goes to show that these stereotypes in the media are extremely pervasive, and they actually affect the subconsciouses of even our professors. So another group of researchers wanted to take a look and see, are these implicit biases also affecting job hiring and your likelihood of getting a job? And this study was conducted by Columbia Business School, and it just came out actually this month, so this is a hot news study that you're getting to interpret the data of. So their hypothesis was that discrimination contributes to the low percentage of women in mathematics and science careers. And they created an artificial experiment where they had two groups of people. One were the job interviewees, and one were the hirers. And what they had them do is they designed a fake position, and they said, this position is going to require people to do arithmetic. And we're going to give the candidates a test to assess how good they are at arithmetic. So they chose a study where men and women perform equally, and the average is the same. And they gave it to half of the participants, and indeed, they performed the same, the average. So women and men are equally good at performing this arithmetic task. And then they divided these groups of interviewees into two groups. In one group, they had to go talk to the hiring manager, and they weren't allowed to tell them their scores, and they had to convince them to give them the job. And in the other group, they had to go to the hiring manager, and they were allowed to tell them how well they did on this exam. And then they analyzed to see which gender was hired by the hiring managers. So again, the results were pretty, well, not too surprising knowing what we know, but still pretty startling. What they found was that there was a strong bias among the hirers to hire the male candidates. And they found this to be true both among men and women. So both men and women were more likely to hire the male candidate. And in the group where the hirers were only able to see the candidate and they didn't know their scores, they were twice as likely to hire the man than the woman. So in the condition where the woman was able to say how well she did on the exam, that did ameliorate the results, and there was a smaller gap in terms of hiring, but there was still a statistically significant difference in terms of which gender they hired. To me, that's pretty frightening to see these kinds of results. And the study interestingly noticed that when men were able to talk about their scores, they tended to boast more and speak more proudly about their scores, as opposed to women who tended to underreport how well they did on the exam and were more modest about their scores. And the researchers believe that this may have played an effect on why the men were being hired and not the women. So this study is really important, not only because it shows subconscious biases, but it also has implications for our workforce. It shows that companies may not be hiring the top talent, and they actually may be suffering because they're actually overlooking many talented women who could be performing at the job better than their male counterparts. So it's a very important study. Okay, so at this point, you may be thinking, well, that's the older generation. Maybe my generation's different, and when those guys retire, we're all going to be equal, because I don't feel that anyone is biased against me and from my peer group. So another group decided to look at students. So they actually tested implicit biases among graduate students. And what they did, it was similar to the professor study. They had them rate, the lights are on, the abstracts. So they had abstracts that were actually presented at research fairs. They took these abstracts and randomly assigned them names like Molly Jane or Bob Johnson. And again, they were the same abstracts, just the names reversed. And they showed them to 243 graduate students in communication. And they asked them to read them all and evaluate them based off of different qualities for the quality of the research and how well conducted and well written the results were. And again, what this study showed was that the young scholars, or these graduate students, rated the publications of the male scientists as higher quality than the identical works of the female scientists. And again, this was true of both the men and the women who were rating these abstracts. And I don't know if you caught this on the previous slide, but 70% of the people being tested were women. So this is by no means a man's problem. Even women are discrediting the work of their colleagues that are female. And interestingly, another part of this study showed that research topics that were seen as more gender appropriate were rated as higher quality. So for example, if a woman author wrote a paper about parenting or body image, then the people rated it as more credible and higher quality than if a woman wrote about something more male appropriate like politics. So it really shows that our stereotypes about the gender aspect of topics is affecting our perceptions of the quality of people's work, which is pretty startling discovery as well. So looking at the peers really brings up another important notion of the stereotype threat. And what this means is when a group is at risk of confirming a self-characteristic, a negative stereotype about one's own group. So basically, this means that women in science might be internalizing these stereotypes because, as we've seen, it's not true that women aren't as good at science. And as a result, it's affecting their own behaviors, the way they view themselves and other women. And just to make a note, this is also true of race. So a lot of these studies will show the same effects with minorities. So one pivotal study, which I bet a lot of you have already seen, is a study that had men and women take an exam. I believe it was a physics or math exam. And they found that when they just took the exam, the scores were about the same. So the two genders performed equally well. But then for another group, they had them mark off their gender right before taking the exam, just a box, female or male. And as you can see on the left side with the stereotype threat, the women performed significantly lower just by marking their gender. So this goes to show that women are really internalizing this notion or these insecurities that they might not be as good at science because they're a woman, and it's actually affecting their scores and their performance. So there have been cross-cultural studies that have really shown how much culture plays a factor in stereotyping and these stereotype threats. And studies that have looked at cultures across countries and performances in math and science between genders have shown that cultures with more implicit beliefs about science stereotypes actually do affect girls' performances in math and science. So in countries that have less stereotypes and don't make statements that women aren't as good in science, they actually find that women perform better, and you see women in the workforce at much more equal ratios as opposed to countries like the US with more of these stereotypes being propagated. So a second problem as to why there aren't as many women in science is a lack of community. And I think, every day we're being bombarded with articles, especially in the tech world recently, about how unfriendly a lot of these industries are towards women. So I'm sure you've heard of programming culture, just communities where women really don't feel welcome. And a lot of research has shown that this culture has been driving a lot of women out. So though they're naturally interested in it, they're not really identifying with the culture they're finding themselves in, and they're opting out for a different career path. And again, women report feeling isolated. You can see this blog article, The Loneliness of the Female Coder. And through Scientista, we've heard a lot of anecdotal stories of women feeling isolated when they're the only girl in their class as well. And a second problem with community is that there really are some strong pockets of women in science communities that have been growing. But up until around now, they've been very fragmented. So maybe one campus has a women in science community and then another campus over here, but there hasn't really been a way for them to talk to each other or for them to really come together to form a strong national network at the college level. So now we know the problem and the reasons. How do we change the ratio and get more women into STEM careers? So this is where Christina and I's story comes in. In 2011, I was a senior at Harvard College, and as mentioned in our introduction, Christina and I were both biology majors, and we'd always been very interested in science on a personal level since we were kids, and we were both working in labs and taking science classes. And when I got to Harvard, I had 7 roommates, all women, and we were all in the sciences. By the time we graduated, I was the only one still thinking of a career in science. All my other friends had left for business or law. And at the same time, Christina and I had been talking, and we really felt that we had a lack of visible female role models. A lot of our classes were taught by male professors. Our mentors, our postdocs, and our PIs tended to be men. And even though they were really great mentors, and I do have to say they were very supportive of me, I couldn't really see myself in their shoes because I knew that I had these other issues as a woman, like balancing family or being discredited by my colleagues. So I became very interested in addressing these issues, the lack of visible role models, the lack of community, and these stereotypes around women in science. So I talked to my sister a lot about it, and we came up with the idea, why not create a new platform for college women in science, one that has a fresh image that dispels stereotypes about what it means to be a woman in science, and a platform that both empowers and connects women to each other so that we can create a more supportive network and really change the culture around what it means to be a woman in STEM. So though we both had science backgrounds, we became very interested in this idea of entrepreneurship and social innovation, and we began attending startup events and decided to write a business plan for this idea. So we entered Harvard College, an undergraduate business plan competition called the I3 Challenge, and we were happily selected as semifinalists. So that's me in that top photo with the bad hair day. And we actually won a small amount of seed funding and office space, which you can see at the bottom. It was a pod in a co-working space, and that's where we really fleshed out the idea for the Scientista Foundation and grew it to what it is today.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Scientista and what it is that we actually do. So a big part of Scientista is our online content. We have an online magazine. We have articles, like this article, How to Balance a Busy Schedule. We also have a lot of Scientista spotlights where we feature women who are doing science in college, graduate level, or professional level. And we do a lot of videos, so we have some office hours with women in science who are actually professors or maybe researchers. We really try to use the website as a way to bring these female role models to women who might not see them otherwise. I think it's the plight of many a science student to not have that much time to attend events like these, or to really, find the time to leave the lab. So we think that, the online content is really important, and it's a great way for you to, actually see these women from the comfort of your dorm. Another big part of Scientista is our social media campaigns. We make a lot of memes on our Facebook page, so I'll show you some. This is one of our favorite quotes from one of the first computer scientists, Grace Hopper. She says, "If it's a good idea, go ahead and do it. It's much easier to apologize than it is to get permission." We also like to have other inspirational quotes. This one's from Ryan Gosling. This is Sheryl Sandberg. She's the COO of Facebook. She's known for creating the lean-in circles. She says, "I want every girl who's told she's bossy to be told instead that she has leadership skills." This is another meme from a series that we've done called Scientista Discovers, and what we try to do is find research that's done by women in science and actually post memes about them in an easily digestible format to try to get people aware of some of the research that women are doing. So this is one scientist, Nina Jablonski, who uncovered a rare ape cranium fossil. A huge part of Scientista is the community. So we actually have over 20 campus chapters and affiliates from across the country, and they are doing some really great things. These are some pictures of our chapters at Loyola. They had a bake sale. We do something called the President's Circle, where the leaders of all these chapters come together in their respective regions, and they talk about issues that they're facing in their chapters, issues relating to women in science, and it's just a great network for these women and a support network for them. And it's a great way to really practice your own leadership skills. We really love this. The Barnard chapter did a really fun, This Is What a Scientista Looked Like campaign, where they all held up pictures of themselves holding a sign. We actually recently just hosted our very first Scientista Symposium. These are some pictures from that. The symposium was a great opportunity for students to actually present their research. We had a poster board presentation fair, and these are some photos of girls presenting their research. They came from all over the nation. We had students from Michigan, Washington State, and the event was held in Boston, so we were very excited about that. We had some fantastic keynote speakers, including Elise Andrews from the I Effing Love Science page. You might have heard of it. She's recently, I think, over 12 million followers now. So she's doing great work in science communication and spreading the joy of science to a lot of people. Another really great keynote speaker we had was Deborah Bear Beaches. She is actually a co-host of the Discovery Channel's one of their shows called Mythbusters. And she also does Outrageous Acts of Science. She was a very dynamic speaker as well. So what does it mean to be a Scientista? All of you are Scientistas, and you can be. You know, what we really think of as a Scientista is not just someone working in a lab solving a problem. You're a creator, a discoverer, an innovator, a leader. You know, you're a change maker. You're out there solving problems that people need answers to. You're bettering society. That's what it really means to be a Scientista, and we want people to really embrace that image and to bring it with them throughout their career. So we have some takeaway points for you all today. I'll start by saying follow your passion. Don't get discouraged, because every field has its hard moments. But if you're really passionate about something, don't let it go. Continue to fight for it, and it'll be worth it at the end of the day. Another really important point is to arm yourself with facts. So, you know, if you want to get a PhD, start learning about the process, getting information, speak to your professors. If you're in a hard math class, try to get help from other people around you. Maybe it's your peers, maybe it's your professor. Don't be afraid to ask for help and to really arm yourself with that knowledge, and that's what's going to help you succeed.
Point number 3, be confident, really speaks to a lot of these stereotype threats that we are talking about. Studies have shown that women tend to doubt their own abilities more than men, and we think it's really important for you to be aware of these stereotype threats and to be confident in your own abilities to learn science. You know, science is challenging. I think talking to any expert, they'll even tell you that there was some class they had a hard time with, and we think it's really important to not get discouraged if you do get a bad grade. Some of the best advice I've heard is to get a tutor or ask somebody to help you and to explain it to you, and don't let yourself get demoralized. I know that once I read that if a man doesn't do well on a test, he tells himself, oh, it was a bad day, I just didn't study hard enough. But if a girl does well, she tends to say to herself, oh, maybe I'm not good enough for this field, maybe this isn't right for me. So remember that you can be confident, and you should be confident in your abilities. Number 4 goes along with this, to speak up. I think there have been a lot of examples today that have shown you that women tend to be offered less money and salaries. They often don't get as many advancements in their career as men. And one thing that a lot of people will tell women is to ask for promotions, ask for higher salary wages, ask for those opportunities, because your male counterparts are doing it and they're the ones getting rewarded. So I think women sometimes need to remember to raise their voices and to ask for more opportunities.
Also, challenge yourself academically. Don't hold yourself back just because you're afraid you might not be able to take that class that you really want to. Give yourself a chance, because if you really try, you probably can do it. And join a network or community. I'll put in a plug for Scientista here, but actually Dartmouth has a really wonderful popping up now. So we'll show that to you as soon as we're done. But yeah, I mean, the mentoring program here at Dartmouth is fantastic. You know, that's just one way that you can get yourself involved in a community.
Number 7, find opportunities. So at Scientista, we really believe that developing your skills and expanding your internship and speaking opportunities is very important. And we definitely recommend that even as undergraduates, you try to go to conferences like this one and research symposiums where you can present your research. And if you're looking for a safe space, Scientista, we just launched our first research symposium, and we're doing it every year, and there's actually prize opportunities to get some scholarships. So don't be afraid to submit an abstract and really start developing those skills that you're going to need to advance yourselves as scientists in academia and in industry. Number 8, seek out a mentor. We believe that having a mentor is extremely important. I know we talked to some women at lunch today who were talking about Dartmouth's really great mentorship program where you can actually get paired with an upperclassman to learn about what their experiences were like and what advice they have for you. And we think that having these peer mentors and professional mentors are extremely important for your development in your academic and professional career. So continue to keep building these relationships and really seek them out. And if you are in an experience where you feel like your mentor is not giving you attention and the right resources that you need, don't be afraid to switch and look for a new one or speak up and ask for more individual attention.
And finally, don't forget to be excited about science because it's really cool and there is really nothing you can't do with a science degree. Pretty much every job out there would be excited to have someone with that kind of a background. So even if you don't want to do a traditional science path, lawyers, a lot of lawyers have engineering background. Businesses look for quantitative skills. There are even actors out there who studied science. So, I think studying science is one of the coolest things you can do. So just remember that, carry that passion with you as you move forward in your career. And also, change does start with you. So if you want to change the culture, you can start doing it by, maybe speaking up to someone who might say something disparaging to you, or, educating your friends around you about what it means. And, you create the change and you create the culture that you want to be working in one day. And that goes for men as well. I think a lot of men ask us sometimes, what can I do to help? And part of that is just encouraging, the culture to change and maybe using, your own motivational skills to maybe speak to other men if they maybe don't have the right idea or if they say something that you think isn't really correct. Just speaking out doesn't have to be in a negative way, just educating others around you.
So that's it. That's all we have for the presentation. I just want to thank you all again for having us. And those are our Twitter handles. I left our Facebook, Twitter, and our email. Feel free to reach out to either one of us about anything at all, and we'd be happy to speak with you. And I'd love to just open it up for questions first, and then if we don't have too many, we can play the video. But thank you.
Hi, I'm with the Women in Science Project here at Dartmouth, and I'm excited that you're here. Tell us a little bit about how you start your college affiliations. Like, what do the students do?
Sure, yeah, I can take that question. So in order to start a chapter, we tried to create a very comprehensive package, a starter kit that will really help you because we know how challenging it is to start a club from scratch. So the process involves you applying with a group of people. So if you're interested in being director, you can submit an application, and you'd need to get a group together of 5 students and a faculty advisor. And then basically we walk you through the process. So we provide you with email recruiting templates, advice about what events to have throughout the year, advice for how to get funding. And we actually have 2 really great campus chiefs who are past students who actually led their own Scientista chapters, and they offer you weekly support, so you can email or talk to them if you ever have any trouble with anything along the way, and they troubleshoot. And then the directors also have an opportunity to partake in the President Circle, which is what we mentioned previously, and you actually get to join presidents from campuses all over the country for Google Hangouts and regional meetups, which students in our community have really loved doing in the past. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing this idea of basically WISP has been here since 1990, and what you're doing is forming this national umbrella, and maybe there's ways for us to connect what we're already doing.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, and a lot of so we help students create standard Scientista chapters, but we also work with affiliate organizations who just want to tap into the network and connect. And we really customize it to the university. So sometimes there will be like a women in physics club or women in engineering, but no overarching club. And the students will really serve as more of an umbrella organization to advertise events and bring in students from the other fields. So there are definitely a lot of ways where Scientista chapters can work with any existing organizations and resources to kind of customize the model per campus.
So I thought it was kind of interesting when you said that how you started off like living with a bunch of women who were all planning on going into STEM, but then instead went into like business or law, which are also very masculine and male-dominated fields, and similarly, I mean, like typically aggressive professions. That's how they're interpreted. What is it about? What are your thoughts as far as you guys have seen on this journey? What is it about STEM that's so much scarier than those? They're so much less accessible.
I'll start out, but I think one of the problems has been a lack of community at the college level for women in STEM, and a larger community, we've seen an increase in the community for women who are in business especially, and also in law. I think there is a larger support network for women in law, at least at the college level, and so that's part of the reason why we wanted to create Scientista. We wanted to make a community, a similar type of community for women in STEM.
Yeah, and along those lines, just from personal experience talking to our friends, we've noticed that there just seems to be a different stereotype or vibe around what it means to be a woman in science. So, for example, there have been a lot of articles that suggest that women who look more feminine are actually discredited and hired less than women who look a different way. And we've noticed that a lot of these kind of cultural stereotypes affect certain women, and they feel a little bit more ostracized. So I can tell you so many stories of women who stopped wearing dresses to the lab because they were receiving comments that they were uncomfortable with, or stories along those lines. And I haven't read a specific study, but just anecdotally, we've been noticing that seems to be, at least at the undergraduate level, a little bit more prominent than women who are in the Women in Business Club or something like that.
There's studies that examine explicit bias, where the majority of the evidence you were talking about was for implicit bias. But was there any cases of actual malicious intent that had a significant effect on career development of women in studies?
So I don't know of any studies. I'm sure that there have been some that looked at that, but I mean, we both feel that right now the larger problem is more of the implicit bias, and I don't hear too many stories of someone actually, explicitly at least admitting to their bias.
So anecdotally, again, we have heard a lot of stories of explicit bias, though I haven't read a study on it, but maybe you can share.
I've definitely heard of women who have told me that their PIs have said, this is not a career for you. They usually do tend to be older, but in coding, my friends who are programmers have told me stories of men who are RA, their peers who have definitely said, oh, you'll never find, a good female programmer. You only got here because you're a woman. Those are definitely stories that we have heard. So there is explicit bias, but I don't know of a study that actually looked at that. Probably there is one, though. Anything else? Okay, well, if we, oh, yeah.
So I really liked your point about arming yourself with facts, and I was talking to you guys right before, and one of the things that I mentioned, and I want to mention it for all of the Dartmouth students here, is that I have a senior who is applying for a development job. She's a programmer, and one of the things that she looked up before she negotiated salary offers was what Dartmouth CS majors should get. And her first two offers were really low, really far below that number. And she was just going to refuse them. She was just going to turn down the offers because they were really out of line. Like, she wasn't even going to say to the company, this is really out of line compared to my expectation. And I said, no, you should at least educate them. And when she told them, look, this is really out of line with my qualification, one of them offered her a 35% increase in their original offer. And like, this is like a pretty huge jump from doing the diligence of saying, like, what is my degree worth? And I'm willing to say, look, my degree is worth more than that. She ended up taking a different, even better, more high-paying job, but it's a useful anecdote, I think.
Yeah, that's a really great success story of the importance of speaking up as well. And along those lines, we have read articles that really say that if you look at a company, if you have some options of with job offers, try to see which company has more policies that are favorable to women as well. So there are companies that make an effort to really make diversity a prominent goal at their company. So that's another way that you can sort of arm yourself and really find a favorable work environment. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so you had implied it, I think, with the last question a little bit, how a lot of times, because there are so few women doing things, a lot of times you get a position, you get some extra special treatment sort of thing, and people say you only got it because you're a woman. And I was just wondering how, as a foundation, like, what do you guys do to sort of address that issue, or what do you tell people? Because it does happen a lot, and it can, because of the confidence gap, a lot of times people will also believe that that's true, that that's the reason that they got what they got.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and unfortunately we do hear that is said to people, and as entrepreneurs, there aren't that many female entrepreneurs, and we hear things like that in the entrepreneurship world as well. And I think some good advice that I've heard about, if you're faced with anybody stereotyping you in general, is to, one, just really be confident in your own abilities and remember that you are just as capable and you're facing discrimination. So, you're having to overcome really tough odds to advance yourselves and, to really work doubly hard to prove yourself. So it's very unlikely that if you're in a job position, they would have taken you even though you're not qualified. It's more likely that a qualified person is getting rejected than that you're not qualified and you're getting hired, if that makes sense. So having that in the back of your mind, I think a lot of it comes just from within, remembering these statistics that you are equally capable of doing well and not letting it get to you and kind of letting it rub off. And the other thing is to arm yourself with facts, not just about how to get jobs, but also about, the statistics that we told you today about women, so that you can kind of rebut some of the things that maybe a colleague will say to you. And we do think it's very important to not laugh at jokes and to not really let things rub off. And somebody at our symposium had a nice way of handling it where if she hears anyone making a gender stereotype at work, she says, I personally don't think it's offensive, but I know that there are a lot of people here who would find that offensive, and I don't think it's a good idea for you to be making those kind of jokes. And that's it. And that way, if you feel like you don't want to seem like the party pooper, but you want to get that point across, that's kind of a nice way I've heard to do it. But yeah, it's definitely a tough issue, and we think it's just important to stay confident and kind of power through if you're ever faced with any of these situations.